Good day, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a while, so I'm just gonna do the predictions really quickly, and then afterwards we do a little sort of update, I guess. So I'll do the governors first because it's kind of easy. Here we go. So all the elections have been had, or the primaries, except for Delaware and New Hampshire, which will be on the next Tuesday. So that would be the 10th. I am recording this on the 5th, and I'm only using data points up until I have to check it out, until the 2nd of September. So if any new polls show up after that, I'm not using them, I'm using them for the October cycle. So at the moment, we have a bunch of safe states, mostly Republican ones. So I'm just going to go quickly over the alphabetical order. So Indiana, we have Mike Braun against Jennifer McCormick. And Braun, I have at the moment winning by 15 points. So that's about a 5-point swing in favor of the Republicans. Next state, Missouri, I have Michael Keogh. He goes against Crystal Quaid. I have him winning by about 24 points. Montana, Gregory Gianforte against Ryan Buss. And Gianforte is going to win by about 27 at the moment. There hasn't really been any much of polling in terms of this particular state. But what I can see, Donald Trump is going to get about 60% of the vote. Gianforte is going to underperform that slightly by about 2 to 3 points. And then you have, on the opposite end, Kamala Harris is going to get like 35, maybe 36% of the vote. Buss, he's going to get about 31. He's going to underperform Harris. And then you have John Tester. He's going to overperform Harris. However, it's going to be like 10 points overperformance in his regard. So he's going to get about 46% of the vote. Compared to Tim Sheehy getting about 52% of the vote. So that is for the Senate election. That goes later today. But just so you know, in terms of performance, Gianforte and Trump run basically the same road. And Tim Sheehy really has to do a lot of work here. Next safe state. Right next to it, North Dakota. Kelly Armstrong is going to win by like 50 points. We don't even have to talk about this election anymore. Next up, Utah. There is a chance that this can be a closer election because I've heard rumors about Phil Lyman, who was the preferred candidate in the Republican convention, but lost the primary election, that he is filing for an independent run. If that is the case, you're going to expect about half of the Republican voter base to just move over to Lyman, like the really conservative base. And they have the liberal Republicans vote for Spencer Cox. You have the Democrats who vote for Brian King, who is a state senator. And then you have the rest who is voting for Phil Lyman, who is a representative of the state. In that particular case, you can see a scenario where it's about 30% for each. And then the undecideds will flip the election in any direction. So at that particular point, if Lyman is on the ballot, then we can say we're going to have some form of discussion to be had here. At the moment, safe Republican. Next state, Vermont. Do we have to talk about this? Phil Scott's going to win by like 70% of the vote. Every single time he's running for re-election, he gets more and more supporters. This is like well, he's just a Democrat, but he's registered as a Republican for the state of Vermont, I guess. So the only thing that happens here is because Phil Scott is running as a Republican, it would mean that in terms of presidential primaries, Vermont gets an extra delegate. That's all there is to it. Next up, we have West Virginia. Patrick Morrissey against Stephen Williams. So there were some rumors about this race where Joe Manchin would run as an independent. Republican Party of all people called out for that. He's ruled it out. He's endorsed Williams. So that makes it really easy because Joe Manchin, his popularity really tanked because of the Inflation Reduction bull crap. So that was 2021, 2022 in that particular range. So Patrick Morrissey is going to win by about 16 points. Which is good for West Virginia because he's an actual conservative instead of the James Justice who is just whatever. For the Democratic Party, there's only one safe seat, and that is Delaware. At the moment, Bethany Hall, she's probably going to win the primary. She does have one challenger that may be a little competent, so we have to see about that. On the other hand, I have Michael Ramone. Don't really know much because there are like 3 Republicans. They're all polling at exactly the same point, which is about 5% of the electorate, and then there's 80% undecided, so it's any man's game. The only 3 states we have to discuss properly is New Hampshire, North Carolina, and Washington. So I'm going to start with New Hampshire because that's one of the easiest. Kelly Ayotte, she is currently leading in the primary. I don't know if the polling is accurate in this particular cycle because I'm seeing a lot in general election regarding New Hampshire polling that is really oversampling Democrats. Which means that the primary vote is also going to be really badly gestured, as evidenced by the New Hampshire primary for the presidential cycle. So, at the moment, I have Kelly Ayotte winning against a hypothetical matchup against George Crack. We'll see next week who the 2 candidates are. It's about 8.6 margin of victory, so that's likely. Personally, I'm hoping for Charles Morse because he's a lot better. But we'll just have to see on that. Next state, I'll do Washington because that's a little less of a safe margin. Or a little less of a toss-up, I should say. At the moment, I have Reichert losing to Ferguson by about 6 points. But if we adjust for the polling mistakes, then we'll see that it will be a 3% margin of victory for Ferguson. Now, we don't know much about Washington in terms of post-primary polling, because it doesn't really happen. It is a 2-party race. There is, I believe, no chance for you to write someone in. So it's a zero-sum game. I do think Ferguson is going to get above 50. I don't know if it's going to be 51% of the vote or it's going to be 53 or 55. That's not really what I'm figuring out from the polling at this cycle. It is going to be a victory for Ferguson, but it's going to be a lot closer than it should be, considering this is Washington after all. Next state, North Carolina. There is some atrocious polling right now, but it does tell me one good thing. Or, well, it does tell me one thing, but it's not necessarily good for the Robinson campaign, but it is good for the Stein campaign. Josh Stein is running on par with Kamala Harris. That's good for him. There's no loss of a Democratic base. Mark Robinson, on the other hand, he's underperforming Trump by about 6 or 7 points. So there's a lot of Republicans that don't know who they're going to vote for in the general election. But knowing that, they will go for Robinson once that decision is made, because they are Republican voters after all. Now, there are particular areas in western North Carolina, for an example. This is your standard, I shouldn't say it, but I'm going to do it anyway. Your classically Klansman area. They will refuse to vote for a black candidate, period. It's the same thing with Eastern Kentucky, the district that is represented by Hal Rogers. They refuse to vote for a black guy. Hence why Andrew Beshear won re-election by 5 points is because Eastern Kentucky refused to vote for Cameron, who is black. So that's essentially the point here. At the moment, I'm going to have Stein winning by about 2 percentage points. Slightly over 2. That is because polling in North Carolina, it slightly overstates Democrats in terms of the gubernatorial election, and the Republicans are understated by 3 points. You need to take that into account because that is basically what the margin of victory is going to be, so it's toss-up, any man's race. For an example, 2016 you had Pat McCrory against Roy Cooper, the current governor. Cooper was supposed to win by 10 points in the final polling on election day. Guess what? He won by a few thousand votes. It was like 0.4% of all votes cast. That's the kind of polling we have to take into account with North Carolina. Historically speaking, Democrats have won nearly every single statewide office in the state since the Civil War. So this is a state that is historically voting Democrat, but is rapidly switching towards the Republicans. So that's it for the gubernatorial elections. I'll see you next time. Next up is going to be the Senate election because it's rather quick. Cheers.